one thing I'm blown away by the positive response so far. I didn't expect that much this early, but I also want people to know that it's normal to be struggling with a lot of these concepts, and it's normal to watch a webinar at times or be going several minutes and not be sure what I'm talking about. So don't worry about that. Because remember, we're trying to change the game here. I'm fundamentally playing a different game because, of course, I'm being a little bit metaphorical here, but the game that basically everyone's trying to play, the paradigm that people on the surface have all sorts of different, beliefs and goals and even religions or politics and all sorts of things, views on life and perspectives, but there's still a way that people tend to be locked in the same game. And I realized it had to change. And there's many angles on understanding alchemy, but one of the things that's going on is that I'm trying to show you how I was able to dig so far down to understand things that to figure out how to get on a playing field where things were rigged to win rather than rigged to basically lose. People don't think of it that way, but they really don't think in terms of really winning, where everything is basically perfect, except there can be more good. We can get rid of bad, and then there could still be lots of opportunities for good stuff. And people don't really think that way. And I'll get to a few words about that. I just have a few words to say about these top notes here. They're just kind of some notes I took for myself to mention. But there's a lot of truths that work, not really truths, but seeming truths that kind of work in practice. One being that you really have to struggle in life in order to get ahead and to succeed, and that success is kind of like about persevering and embracing struggling rather than just doing what's easy. It really doesn't even have to quite be that way. You don't really need to struggle like people think, but in order to not have to struggle, you need to change the game, like we're talking about here. Effort. I wrote this on my recent offer letter about alchemy. Effort is it's a symptom of internal conflict. And so we don't really need, and especially as we change the game by understanding who we are and differentiating ourselves from our mind, which we'll continue to explore here in this webinar, then we're just set up so differently where, like I talk about, we can have a calm confidence. And it's almost hard to even give a full sense. One day maybe I'll figure it out, and then it'll be even easier to help people, right? To give people more and more of a sense of what life can be like when you really change the game. Fletch said something really helpful it's like on a testimonial type of video that he posted. It's in the OMG way on one of the recent Alchemy threads. It's probably for the thread for the one I did on Wednesday, which would have been about 5 days ago from when I'm recording this. But he made like a 1.5-minute recording, and he said that when I first started teaching my ideas, which I did under the heading of law of implication, which I still use to describe my method, but I'm just calling this course Alchemy, referring to mixing and dissolving ideas and turning things to gold, metaphorically. But I started about 2.5 years ago explicitly teaching parts, or starting to teach parts of how I see things and how my system works and how my model for the world works, about 2.5 years ago. And what Fletch said is that when he first saw it, what he was trying to do was learn it and absorb it, and he figured, good, I'm just going to learn this and absorb it, and then I can use it and I can teach it. And he said that there was plenty of helpful things that he got from doing that, but he said it wasn't until he let it sort of break him or break his mind or break him out of his way of thinking on a pretty deep level that he got just tremendous results and benefit from it when he shifted to doing that. And I don't like, he didn't use this word, this is Fletch, everything he said was terrific, but just from what I said just now, I don't really like this, how even within the wrong game that people are playing, there's this idea of ideas being deep. What I'm interested in is an idea of like pervasive. Is it going to mix with all sorts of things in our life, right? Like, so the idea of our mind and how that really works, and who we are, and how identification works. If we identify with our mind, or if we identify with a group of people, or take on different identities and so forth, how does that type of thing work? Those types of understandings and where we're standing regarding ideas like that mix constantly with our practical lives and our decision making, and they may or may not be front and center. Sometimes they are, and ideas like goals and so forth. It's always there. When I talk some more about goalscape today, and a word I kind of coined to explain a major thing that I do, that if you get, and as you get it, and as you apply it, and some people have talked about already applying it and really getting a lot of benefit, but as you adopt that part of the game change, then all by itself, just that one thing is going to make such a massive difference for you. And then I have a line here on this slide about another way that Alchemy is organized. In terms of money getting, and then this will also help explain how it can help with relationships a bit too, but in terms of money getting and my plan and my system and my actuality, the fact that I've done it, with making multiple six figures a month, what I'm going to show you regarding that, and what I'm laying the groundwork for and the foundation for, and the context for, is where in our day and age, whatever you're doing now, whether it be a job or whether you have your own business that you're working on or both, then having a model in your mind for this idea of consulting and joint venturing. And can you imagine how if you are working at a job and then you have this idea that, look, I'm going to build a skill or a set of skills, and then I'm going for doing some kind of consulting or teaming up with some other people with a business, and then I'm going to hone that, and also by starting somewhere and doing some form of consulting or even something like tutoring or a little bit of coaching, or if you learn how to use one major application that a number of people might need help with, and you help them with that, like Excel or there's a zillion things these days. Then you also will get used to doing consulting. That can snowball. You can get referrals and so forth. Of course, the OMG coaching program is all about giving you tools to do consulting regarding free advertising, free traffic, ranking on Google, Amazon, YouTube, that sort of thing. But that's one application, and it's a super field these days, and it's hard to get the right information on it, so that's why we have a program on it. But with Alchemy, I'm giving you my framework for money getting and thinking of organizing your career this way. And you can even think of, in a sense, if you want, of your job in a bit of like that. But whether or not that really applies to your job, at least you can be building something on the side that you're developing over time with consulting and joint venturing, and then you're building your own offer when you learn to look at things this way and develop it this way. But then it's just a wonderful framework to have for money getting, to take yourself to 6 figures a month or more for sure, if you really want that. And I'm not saying that you need to want that, but if that's the kind of thing you want, then operating within this consulting model is going to be terrific for you. And I think such the way to go these days. We tend, I referred to this briefly before, but let me give you this kind of mental picture, this illustration, a little bit like I gave you the illustration in previous webinars. I gave you a few, right, about the local peaks. I gave you an illustration about the berries, where if you can distinguish berries, then you can get different results, where instead of just thinking they're all the same berry. Showing about how distinctions can help us, even if we were doing something right sometimes and doing something wrong other times. I think this is on the second webinar, I believe, but you can see as you go through them. And then I also talked about the driving into San Francisco illustration of where you could be doing something, or you can kind of meander into, or accidentally stumble into doing something right, but if you don't know how to recognize what you're doing right, then you could start doing it wrong again. And so it's very valuable to understand how you're doing something right. And that's the driving out of San Francisco illustration. But let me give you, see if I talk myself out of my thought here. Let me get it back. Consulting, JVing, offer. What was the illustration with an offer? Let me see here. It's personal shark. I mean, does anyone remember what? Yeah, I might just have to come back to it if I can't remember the exact illustration I was giving you. I was saying that we want to build work with other people, have that's the strangest thing. Okay. There's an advertisement for doing recorded sessions rather than live ones, right? But so I'll just round out, talk about this, and it comes to me, great. Otherwise, it'll come to me later, and I can talk about it in the future. But all right, let's move along then, and then we'll see if I get back to that. This is kind of a separate note, but I'm just giving a little bit of context here about alchemy and just kind of reminding ourselves of a few things we've talked about. Let me just see if there's anything in the group where anyone can give me a little. We'll get the lives more genuine. Yeah, that's why I'm doing it this way. There's just something to the energy of it, and what I knew going into alchemy is that I have a tremendous amount of clarity about my system. And then, but I really want to get people over the hump with it and really get them to change the game for themselves, not just get nuggets here and there. And there's something where if I just came on live for a few months, right, then I was quite certain I could really make it all happen. And hello, Marsha. Consulting snowballs, right? Yeah, that can help. And yeah. So let's see. I was thinking how you're doing consulting. You were saying how you really think consulting is an incredible way to go. We can get to 6 figures a month, right? Right before. It all relates to the building, not begging, and building your offer. It might have just been the building your offer illustration, but it may not. It's the strangest thing. You'd think that I would. It wouldn't be this far from my mind. But it very well might have just been the idea of framing the offer and building the offer. So let's do that. So as we learn to have this idea where whatever where we're specifically looking to gain skills, gain confidence and competence by doing some consulting of some sort, and then you can that can lead to referrals, as I was saying. But yeah, that was the illustration. The illustration was now I'm getting the feeling back. But it was just having this mental picture of an offer, like this tangible thing you're building. So if you imagine whatever you have to do for your stable base, and let's just suppose for the sake of argument you have a job, then instead of thinking it's kind of complex and a little blurry to be thinking, all right, I want to start my own business, and so I got to do this and I got to do that, and like there's just a lot, to that, and that can work. That can be okay. Yay! I got to it. Maybe I'll edit this recording a little bit when I go back. Frogger was the thing, right? Was the illustration, and offer was one that I also wanted to give you an illustration of. But okay, but I want to give you guys to give you this illustration about Frogger, and it isn't on this on the slide. That's what was messing me up. I'm gonna just write Frogger. I'm gonna go into the OMG Way books. I'm not looking in the wrong place. Frogger. All right. I'm not seeing. Sorry. If you go to she wouldn't be hearing me. Let me just reply to this. Okay, I have to do a certain amount of editing here. Okay. Let's see. Okay, Frogger. This is a great thing to understand because one of the things I've done a little bit of this week is I got some questions like about Eckhart Tolle. I might be pronouncing that a little bit wrong. And I read books anyway. I'm reading another book that I won't mention, but it's giving like the general type of advice that a lot of us get, and it's not exactly new age. It's more like just self-improvement type circles. And so the Frogger illustration is that when you're using the kind of interview method or the method of people that are successful sort of reflecting on how they were successful and telling you how they did it, then if you imagine Frogger, where it's an old video game, right? And whether or not you can imagine the video game, you just imagine that there's a whole bunch of actual frogs and they're trying to hop across a multi-lane highway. And then some of them will get squashed, right? And some of them will make it to the other side. And if you interview the ones that got to the other side after they get there, right? If you imagine like a bunch of reporters or a success motivational interviewer talking to them and saying, what was it? How is it that you got to the other side? Then they would give you, they would reflect on why that happened, but you wouldn't be getting, there's all kinds of things that either the ones that got smashed, basically, aren't going to be there to tell you what they were doing wrong, right? Or what blocked them and so forth. So, there's also I want to relate this to something regarding, there's a common piece of advice regarding that one of the highest forms of living your life or your career, especially regarding your career, is to be like mission driven. And I want to talk about two things simultaneously here, so I have to pick one, right? So regarding Frogger, I want you to know, first of all, that, and I've said this bits and pieces, but I just want to make it kind of clear here, that I'm giving you a system that I knew in advance. I've done a lot of thinking and work to try to explain to you in terms that can make sense. And as you can see, I'm still a work in progress. But as Mike talked about once, there was in this great kind of spontaneous rant that he did on a marketing webinar once for our main coaching program. He explained to people how over 10 years ago, it was maybe 12, 13, 14 years ago, he said that I came to him, and it's true, and I said, Mike, I've got it. And we had worked together previously. We had played Magic, the Gathering, and we played, you don't play like team, like doubles tennis or anything, but we teamed up in the sense of working on things together. Kind of like if you have two people that are both SEO consultants and they don't have a business together, let's say, but they work together and they share ideas and they mastermind. And that was sort of how Mike and myself were with Magic, that game. We got to the top of the world in that. But then I helped him open a game store, just kind of consulting and so forth, in essence, not paid, just as a kind of, we help each other. But then he was doing that, and I was working on stuff and doing my accelerated learning course some more, called speed learning, back at that time during my 20s. But then things finally came very fully together for me, and I said, look, pick anything and we can get to the top of the world in it. Like I get how it works now, and I had really changed the game for myself. And I've discovered plenty of things since then, but I'd really broken through at that point. And a lot of it since then has been applying it to some various areas. I told him before I did so, I told him that I knew how to find the relationship of my dreams and create it, and what to look for myself in a woman or a wife, and then how to do it, and then I did. And then we worked together on a career, right, a business situation, and we made that work very well. And at this point, we have, right, gotten to like the top of the world in a sense of, I don't mean the actual top or not. I'm not trying to, it's not relevant. Of course, you can never, there's always someone making more money. But in our niche, then we're we're one of a handful, obviously, or of the top in our niche. I'm not worried about whether we're the best or not. You can always come up with your own standards and say you're the best, or some other guy can say he's the best. But certainly we're world class in what we do, just like I said. And so alchemy is not me just saying, oh, look how successful I've gotten, and I'm just going to think about how I was successful and talk about things, tips, and what my system is after the fact. I'm giving you the system I used in the first place to do it, and then at this point I've demonstrated it. And let me touch also on this mission idea. And then I'll pop back up here to the getting beneath all assumptions. So what you'll often, there's often some form of advice that comes down to, you can work at a job or you can do something you're passionate about, right? And there's a lot of advice to do what you're passionate about. And I had a question by someone, I think it was last week, about this that I didn't develop yet. I think I said I would, and I gave maybe a few thoughts, but excuse me. And this is all part of a similar idea that kind of in the background, this will help give you a sense of things, or just another angle on changing the game, and also not getting stuck with some common ideas that are out there. The idea of making the world better, and this is, again, something I've talked about, but there's just another quick little angle on it. Because it can be easy to read that, and it can be easy for it to make sense. And I was just reading a book, as I said, that was saying that. There's a few problems you can run into. One is, for sure, one thing is you need to make sure you take care of your stable base, no matter what it takes, as long as you're not treading on someone else's property, right? Violating someone else's property rights. Then you need to do whatever it takes to get yourself stable financially. And I think people can get tripped up on thinking that they need to do something that they're passionate about regarding that, right? But then also very important, and maybe more important or whatever, is that this idea of making the world better, right? And I touched on something related to this on last Wednesday as well, five days ago, on the assimilation webinar, the mashup. If your end vision for the world involves the world still having a bunch of problems, then there's a way in which you're giving up the game. Do you see? It's so normal to think that way, like, oh, if I can just make the world better, if I can leave the world better, a better place for my kids. And that sounds so right? But it's exactly contrary to where I'm trying to take us with the game change. And it's contrary to what I can testify I've used this whole way through for over a decade to turn things to gold consistently in every part of my life. So do you see how that's losing? And I don't mean that negatively, but you're giving away the game. If you say, well, whatever happens when my life ends, there's going to be a whole bunch of bad, but if I can make the world a little bit better, then that's good enough. Well, good enough is a contradiction in terms. You can have gratitude for any amount of good, right? And so you always have gratitude no matter how much good there is, as long as there's any good that you can see or find or whatever, and there is generally, or probably always, but one way or the other, you can have gratitude. But then separately, there's no good enough. Any good is enough for gratitude, but no amount of bad, and good and bad are actually two different things. There's not a sliding scale where you go up and it's good and you go down and it's bad. That's a mistake that your brain makes. It's something else that isn't going to make full sense right now, but I'm indicating it now, and it's one of the many things that's part of my model that is correct as well, and it's critical. But for now, we'll just kind of use that concept, and at some point I'll be able to deal with it directly. So if there's any bad, then that's not good enough. And so if we're satisfied with a whole bunch of bad, that can only be because, and I talked about, I referred to something along these lines in the I'm pretty sure it was the first webinar when I talked about this assumption of helplessness. And so this idea that I just want to make the world better, it actually reinforces an idea of helplessness. And so you're playing the wrong game. And it's that type of thing that I want to change for you. And the reason I'm mentioning this in the same kind of breath or a few moments I'm talking about consulting and joint venturing and your offer is it relates because what I'm trying to do with you in Alchemy is I'm trying to change the game in such a different way where we're set up to really win. Where when you're coming from that place, you get so much right when it comes to importance and priorities, and your curiosity is transformed, and then you end up automatically acting and thinking as the kind of person that inspires confidence, loyalty, a feeling of safety. You know how we feel like when we're dealing with other people, then it's like there's landmines in their mind, and we're trying to tiptoe around them and not set them off to a greater or lesser degree. If you're, I don't know, if it's lucky or whatever we call the word, blessed, then maybe you have some or many people in your life where you don't really have that much of an issue with that. But to some degree we have that, right? And in the business world we have that a fairly large amount. Maybe with everyone, right, that we deal with in business, where there's like this sense of landmines, right? And there's this kind of sense of like you're not that safe with the people that you're doing business with. But as you're looking to win in the way that I'm trying to build out the context of, so it's something that's totally part of your worldview and totally part of a great comprehensive worldview that all makes sense, but that's so radically different than how people normally think. Even people that are pretty enlightened and people that are successful, because people that talk about being mission-driven and making the world better, these are pretty high-quality people. I'm not being condescending at all towards them. I don't think I'm better than anybody, period. I think certain ideas are better than others. And I think we can think that we're better at certain skills or that we have knowledge that's correct and that's an idea that someone else expresses. We could say that idea is wrong. But I don't think I'm better than anyone ever in any kind of general sense, morally or intellectually or whatever. But anyway, these are some pretty high quality people, right, generally, that these mission-driven people, and that's good, but we want to change the game even radically different than that, all right, because ultimately they're still playing to lose, and there's all kinds of symptoms that kicks off. There's all kinds of problems and frustrations and things they're not going to figure out. You're not going to break out if you're content with losing. If you're content with the world being crappy when you die, but as long as you can make the argument that you made it better, then you can just fool yourself in so many ways. There's so many ways that you're letting your brain off the hook, and blurriness is okay. And you just basically at that point you just create your own standards, right? And your brain can create its own standards for why it is that you made the world better. When you need to change the game, because when you understand how your brain works, you can't set it up to where it can win by being blurry and by just coming up with its own standards and then meeting them. You need to change the game so your brain's default thinking can't take over and doesn't run the show. And the only way to do that, I'm telling you, there's one and only one way. At least there's one kind of comprehensive way. And one angle on that that's necessary is that you've got to be in it to win. And win means there's no more bad in the entire world. It doesn't mean you have to be frenetically trying to do anything. It doesn't mean you have to be disquieted in any way. And you can be fully taking care of yourself. Part of winning is you take care of yourself first. Now that's different than being selfish or greedy. It just means that you need to get yourself to a stable place. Now maybe you can live in a desert with no food and water. Jesus seemed to indicate that that's possible, all right? Or at least where you have no possessions and you get along fine. I think that might be possible. I don't understand how to do that. So instead I find some other relatively minimal way where I'm okay, right? Practically speaking, for myself, that was $2,000-$3,000 a month. Let's say $1,000 a month when I was single, and then even when I got married, I didn't promise that I'd make more than that. And I didn't have my self-image be that I had to make more than that. So because, then my wife could work, and as long as I could support myself. Obviously things worked out well, right? So I wasn't limiting myself to that either. But one way or the other, take care of yourself first. That has nothing to do with being greedy or selfish, right? But you need to be stable one way or the other, financially and any other ways. And you can try to make that simple and decluttered for yourself, but whatever it is, and if you can figure out a way to sustain yourself on virtually nothing or absolutely nothing, or somehow it just comes to you, great. And you can let me know how that works, and I'd be happy to understand it and share it as well, all right? But however it is, the way I look at it, though, again, and since I don't know how to do that, then I come up with something else I do know how to do and deal with that and make sure I'm okay within reason. And then you can also, as you make sure you're okay, that when you're looking to win overall, I'm just getting my thought back here. There's some things you can never just make sure that you're like perfectly physically safe, right? So then I realize that's just like an infinite regress. I can't get there, so I let that go. But I can live my life and help other people and even go to try to make the world perfect without being physically safe. But if I didn't have food to eat, then I don't know how I would do that. Again, there might be a way. I just don't know how I would. So since the best I know is to figure out, it's easier currently for me to figure out how to get that food, then I do that, right? And a roof over my head and so forth. So whatever it takes to just basically be okay where you're not in a panic yourself. And then another thing about going to win overall is that you want to get to a place. Part of the game change that I'm getting you to is you're not creating your own problems and your own drama. And that happens a lot for people because if you're just trying to make the world better, it doesn't lead anywhere again. And so there's all this room for all this. It just doesn't break you out. And so people just kind of end up creating their own obstacles just to overcome them. But when you have this clear idea of how you want the world to be and where you want to get, then you make yourself stable, and then you can you're seeking understanding that will lead to you having more power to create more good and dissolve more bad stuff. That can be communicating, that can be something involving partly a career, partly it'll come across in how you could be kids or not having kids, either way, or just the people you interact with. But that needs to be your vision. And until and unless you get that, that's one of the blocks we have to break through. Yet another way to understand what I'm doing with you here is that there's block after block that my system, my model, and my methods are going to be breaking you through. And we need to break through a whole number of them that are out there. There's a whole number of false ideas that will lock us out of playing the game on the right playing field. But when you're playing the game on the right playing field, it's so easy to build a career, and I'll focus, what I know is about consulting, joint venturing, and building your offer. That really applies to any sort of career anyway, and it also even applies to your personal relationships. And it's so easy to apply to job relationships with your boss, things that can get you a better job within your company that you're in or in a separate company. So it applies, with just very little change, to pretty much anyone. But my method for succeeding greatly with joint venturing with people and consulting and building my offer first involves changing the game. And then it's easy. Then the details aren't tough. But like joint ventures are such an incredible way to make money if you can team up with people in the right way. But that's something that normally people are mostly locked out of. And it's so tough for people. Boy, I mean, you just see it nonstop, and these joint venture partnerships just don't, or a group of people, they just either fall apart or they end up being quite inefficient and so forth. And basically everyone besides me when I say everyone besides me, I don't know that for sure. And Cotton is a great exception, and some of the other OMG coaches with what they're doing can be with SEO consulting. But then that happens to be within my sphere, right? But certainly there could be a person here and there. But I have a business that I designed that's on OMG machines, right? That's like in the 15 to 20 million a year range with 0 employees. That may not exist ever anywhere or have existed. I just don't know. Maybe it has. Maybe it hasn't. But I've done it all with joint venturing. Normally people just can't hold that kind of thing together. They can't even come close. Like, it's not like people almost do what is going on in OMG, where you have several people joint venturing, and I'm kind of at the hub of it with my system and my understanding of my model and where I'm standing. That's accessible to you as you take on my model of things. But I know the model, and I'm sharing it with you, but it's out of the box, and it's like out of the box that's out of the box. Like, the people that are mission-driven and successful success teachers and business people are out of the box themselves, and they're doing great. And I'm yet another box removed that is, as far as I know, unique. And it's really effective. And the people that are in that better but other box, they're still talking about struggling. They're still talking about making the world better rather than getting rid of all the bad. Right? They have this idea of good enough. That's a contradiction in terms, implicit or explicit in what they're teaching and their systems. I'm comfortable being critical of ideas. If I can show an idea is wrong and it can block you, then I need to talk about it in that way. It's different than being critical of people. Same thing if I'm critical of, like, government participants, government workers. It's not the person that I'm having an issue with. I'm just trying to explain about ideas, and dissolving those ideas can be helpful. All right. And then I put this note here about why to get beneath all assumptions. Just another thing that's part of the model that I'm trying to get to you is we want to, I'm not necessarily going to say a whole lot about this, but I realize that you can't win if you're making any assumptions. If you're believing that something is true, like I've talked about, rather than believing as if something's true. And this idea I'll develop when I specifically go over my method for how to know what's true, which is all important, but there's a way in which if I just led with it in my experience, which doesn't mean that it would have happened this time. Maybe it would have been the best way to lead. Who knows? But there's a way that it's so out of the box. Not even what I'll show you isn't even. It's not going to seem weird or anything like that at all. But it just feels like it's not important because it's so against the game that people are normally playing. It's so against how our minds work and what feels important and how our brains figure out what's important that I just wanted to build some other things first before I got straight to that method. But one person was posting in Austin was posting in my Proof of God thread when I was doing that bonus webinar, and he was saying, I just don't see, he said we can have greater or lesser degrees of certainty. I get that. I'm paraphrasing, but I can get that. But how can we? But we can't just know things. Like, I don't see how we would just say we know things for sure. Well, the thing is, if you know that you have a greater degree of certainty, then that in and of itself is something that you know, right? To say, so what I'm saying right now, the purpose of it is to keep you, is less to get you finished with certain ideas, but more to keep you open and aware of some of the places we're going, some of what we're doing here, and also and to keep you from projecting some common ideas that are out there that might look similar to mine on top of what I'm saying. So it's more along those lines. And it helps give you an idea of where we're heading, which can always be nice. All right, so with that 46-minute or so preamble, I guess we started a couple of minutes after 7, but about that much. Then let's talk about Goalscape. Let me just, for a moment, for a little bit, I'll go to the Facebook group for a moment, but then we'll deal with this topic. I think people have been looking forward to discussing Goalscape and so forth. And even what I've talked about so far is all context related to Goalscape anyway. You may have heard me, I don't know how much I've talked about this specifically in Alchemy, but one of the counterintuitive ways to understand answers and so forth is to build out context from footholds that you have until the answers fill themselves in. So you're going to see me doing that a lot, and it'll often feel counterintuitive, where it'll look like I'm not directly addressing an issue until all of a sudden, boom, we'll realize we have the answer to something we don't even realize maybe I was even talking about. Yeah, and one of the reasons I mentioned consulting is kind of like that, is that we're going to keep talking about stuff, and then all of a sudden consulting is going to be radically easy for you, and joint venturing is going to be very, very easy for you. And it might seem like we weren't talking about joint venturing or relationships, but then it all worked out like gold. Is it safe to say regarding your passion, do whatever it takes to make enough money to get back your time, then go after your passion? That's a great question, Mike. I would say, interesting thing is, in one sense, with almost any goal that you're going after that's fairly important, you actually want to set yourself up to do whatever it takes regarding any goal. In a sense, and you do that. I've talked about this in different recordings, but I haven't really discussed this in Alchemy. You do that, and I'll just give a quickie on this, and then develop it in the future. But you set boundaries within which you can do whatever it takes within those boundaries. Me talking about individual property rights and morality regarding that, you're going to see place after place. It's going to reveal itself where that's critical for mundane goals that you have, and decluttering your mind, and dealing with other people, and there's going to be nonstop applications of things like that, where it'll look like, oh, maybe David's talking about government or libertarianism, but actually it becomes critical all over the place for what we're doing. But that's an example of a boundary, right? People will have all sorts of extra moral thoughts, and culture, for example, is just a whole set of like moral rules. They may or may not be presented as such, but like, you need to do this or that's bad. You need to do this or that's bad. You need to dress this way or it's bad. You need to talk this way or it's bad. If you talk this way, it is bad, and so forth. By having the individual property rights thing as our clarity with morality, that and love, obviously, with the positive morality, you combine those two, and you have an example of a boundary that is simple, and it's big in the sense of the culture can be very restrictive and put so many little goals and restrictions on us that we can't hardly do whatever it takes to achieve a goal because there's so many arbitrary restrictions. By having the boundary be clear and expansive, but keeping out what needs to be kept out with the individual property rights, where you don't tread on other people's property rights, but then you have this nice large area, so to speak, and then you can do whatever it takes within that. Or also, as part of boundaries, you can delineate some resources. You could say, within this amount of time or money or whatever, then I'm going to do whatever it takes to go for it. So that's something about doing whatever it takes. But that's a big part of how I do things, is I set myself up where there's kind of these boundaries and some red flags, but inside of those, then I can do whatever it takes. Very powerful. And which also means being very flexible. To be flexible, though, you need to have something strong that's like a foundation. And then you can be very flexible within whatever the boundaries that are necessary. And then you're motivated to get the boundaries as large kind of as possible, as unrestricted as possible, while still restricting what needs to be restricted. So I would do whatever it takes to get to a stable base. I don't know that you need to make enough money to quit your job necessarily, and that's not necessarily what Mike is saying, but just to give a few interpretations. and then go after your passion. What I did was I made enough money to take care of my finances for the rest of my life, and that allows me to go after. Ironically, it's not exactly my passion, or some of these words like passion and mission. They're a little bit. They're great in a way. They're not inherently wrong, but they're kind of tied in with this with still the old model of the world, or the usual, not usual kind of lame model of the world, but kind of usual kind of success model view of the world. That is, again, that model. I have a good amount of respect for it. It's significantly better than the kind of lame model of the world, right? That the success model sort of gets you out of. But passion almost follows finding ways to, I don't know, just to be simplistic, help people. Then, because think about it, if you take care of yourself, including, and that has to include getting to a calm confidence of mind, no matter what resources you have. If you don't have a way to stop creating your own problems and issues in your mind, then you're not okay, right? And you're not going to be okay even with resources. Like, you won't feel okay. Functionally, you won't be okay. Not because I say so. What I mean is you just actually won't be okay. You're just going to constantly have to tend to your own needs. When I say take care of yourself, I mean get to a place where you don't really need to tend to your own needs as a certain sense of a priority. Now, taking care of yourself might include an ongoing amount of rest and like recreation and so forth, but then it'll leave some amount of time and creativity, and almost actually pretty much all your creativity, and then plenty of your time will be left over to help others, because people need help, a lot of it, right? If we're going to get rid of the problems in the world, then people need a lot of help. You take care of yourself. I'm not just repeating, but I'm just taking a quick inventory of what I said. You get yourself where you're okay, which includes a calmness of mind and enough resources that you're stable. And that can include some ongoing rest and recreation. Then you're helping others. Now there's two sets of others. There's people that you have these sort of pseudo-contractual relations with, and I'm not trying to put it in some kind of cold way, but like your allies, your family, people that you have kind of a responsibility towards by voluntarily, right, is the only real, all contracts are voluntary, right, unless they're not a contract, unless they're coercion that's forced on you, which is just a different issue. Dealing with coercion falls in the realm of taking care of yourself, right? If you're being threatened with physical harm, which happens consistently in a totalitarian state when you're a subject of one, like we are, but you have to do what it takes to take care of that. That's taking care of yourself. Then separately, you have your voluntary alliances, responsibilities, family, people you might work with in business, other allies, friends. There was kind of like an alliance in a sense, right, where you care, but you care about everyone, right? So you have. It's not a matter of you care. You don't want to see the world in terms of tribes and groups. So take care of yourself. Then you have your kind of responsibilities and such, and then you're helping those people, and then as well you want to keep those at a certain level, because you're not going to win just by taking care of your responsibilities, right? And then with what's left over, then you can contribute to others, and that's what's actually going to make you happiest. I'm not telling you to do that in order to feel like you're a good person or because you should, except for using the word should in the correct sense. It's hard because sometimes I'll speak colloquially like normally, but there's a clear definition of should where it's different than the usual usage. The usual usage is like arbitrary. It's like cultural. You should do this, you should do that, you should do this. And some of that might be good suggestions, some of it might not be. But the logical meaning of the word should is that something should be done if it would actually make you and other people happier, net, total. If it's good, if it will lead to good, right, and good resides in your experience, right, your existence, your consciousness field, however you want to understand it. But it doesn't reside in objects, is my point. And you yourself will feel happier, and it's a natural consequence of going for the goal that's going to turn everything to gold in your life. That's going to, and then this all relates and this all relates to goalscape, everything I'm talking about, just contextually, but it all relates. Another thing that I want to develop with you, and kind of now, like not necessarily on this webinar, but one of the things I'm in the middle of developing with you as kind of what's going on currently, as opposed to things I'll get to, is this distinction between you and your mind, and then the ramifications of that, and how to take advantage of that, and so forth. You want to look at the world more and more like your mind as a mechanism, and you're trying to set it up properly. And that's where the goalscape is going to come in, is when you're paying attention to the goalscape. And I'll talk about that directly in a few minutes. But when you're paying attention to the goalscape, well, let me back up one more thought. Your mind. You want to, one way to look at the world that's part of my model, and it's correct, is you're trying to set your brain up or your mind up for doing the stuff that's going to get at the best ideas, which will cause your mind and body to act on the best ideas and so forth. So it's like this mechanism that can learn, that can dissolve bad ideas if it's led to, but that won't typically do it. That won't generally do it on its own, and lead it to get more good ideas. Trying to think. So I was talking about in general, we want to look at life or as us interacting with our brain in a way that that sets it up to operate optimally, to go get good, to go figure out good, get more good ideas, get rid of bad ideas, and then act on that, right? And then our body does its actions and motions based on our mind's planning and decisions, and if we do it all right, then more good happens, and less bad happens. And part of setting our brain up to do that is it's not going to be possible unless we're going to win, unless we're going for this final goal of the world being perfect. Without that, we're just locked out. Our brain is going to end up taking over. Just looking a little bit here. Okay. Let's talk about, I coined a new word for you, which is mindscape, and this will help with understanding goalscape and so forth. And again, as I said, this one idea, if you want to kind of latch onto something for now, this one idea of navigating and focusing on the goalscape much more. And what I do is I'll generally be focused on the goalscape, and then I'll dip in to, I'll explain what I mean by like the landscape and the mindscape, kind of like a video game or watching a movie. I might be dipped in a lot, right? But there's a way in which I'm easily woken out to where I'm just like a person who might watch a movie or play a game, a video game, but it's easy for them to pop out of it whenever necessary, right? If the phone rings or whatever, if there's an appointment or whatever it might be, they're ultimately navigating in what we call just normally the real world, right? I'm just speaking metaphorically, so just within our normal view of the real world. Everything's a little complex here at Alchemy, but just the non-complex normal idea of the real world. A person, metaphorical to me talk about the goalscape. Imagine a person who normally they're operating in the real world, but then they'll watch a TV show or play a video game, but they're always able to pop out of it and generally deal with their life. And let's say that they're generally live successfully and well in the real world. And in parallel, metaphorically, that's what it's like with me in the goalscape. And if someone else seems to be doing this, then they may. But as long as they're talking about winning in the way that I mean it, as long as they're understanding to get beneath all assumptions and make zero, fundamentally, and things like that. As long as knowing what is true and having the correct method of that is explicitly claimed as the most important thing to do first. Right, the priority, the most important question is, how do we know what's true? We can't go anywhere else until we know that. You might say, well, why don't you cover that first then, David? Well, I know the answer to it, and I'm using it, and so we can proceed, right, with me laying context to it, not without me talking directly about it. But I'll get questions. What about, is this person talking about what you're talking about, David? Is this person talking about the goalscape? And again, unless they're saying these other main things that I'm saying, then I wouldn't worry about that. I would just try to get this from me for now until you really get it, and then you can decide. Then you can go back and figure out whether the other person knew it. But since you're participating in Alchemy, you might as well just get it from me. All right, so if we think of the landscape, I'm trying to just think of a practical example to work from here. So let's just use trying to rank a website on Google. And maybe it's for like an e-commerce business where you can make some sales of your of whatever trinkets or T-shirts or anything that you might be selling. In terms of the landscape, I'm talking about what you kind of just see with your eyes and so forth on the screen, but also events, like or separately, if you're talking with people, a lot of people's conversation is about the landscape in the sense that they'll describe events. So if you're either just looking around at what's going on, like on your computer screen, and what links you're building or what things you're selling, that's what I mean by the landscape, and that's paying attention to the landscape. If you are thinking about what you did yesterday or talking to someone about what you're selling on your site, or if you're anything like that, where you're thinking about or recounting or remembering facts and events, including just looking at current events or currently what's on your computer screen, that's landscape. Mindscape is also not the goalscape, and so this will be a useful distinction, because otherwise this will make it pretty much easier to see what I mean by goalscape. Mindscape is when you're making statements like, let me see if I don't know that I have this on a slide, I might just have it in my notebook. I have it in my head pretty well, but okay. When you're saying, I want such and such, or I'm expecting, you're like saying, I'm hoping that that this will work, right? If you're like, oh, I need to do this by such and such a time, or my goal is this many sales, or I worry that I won't get this done, or what I need to do, or this might not even seem like negative thoughts. This might be like, oh, good, I accomplished this, excellent. And none of this is wrong. It's just the mindscape. It's different than the goalscape, right? Obviously, looking at the landscape, for example, isn't wrong, right? It's not wrong to like open your eyes and look at what's on your computer screen, or to sometimes think about past events. So none of these are wrong or right. It's just that what is wrong is not understanding the goalscape, and not understanding that that's where you want to make sure you focus as much as you need to. Just like someone who's watching TV and playing computer games needs to focus on their real life as much as they need to, in order to have that not fall apart, right? So how much do you need to focus on the goalscape? As much as necessary, and then no more than necessary, and then you can be operating in the mindscape and the landscape. All right. So with mindscape, you are talking about goals as if they have a certain reality to them. That's kind of fixed. So again, all kinds of statements, and normally people, the way this should look, if you're seeing what I'm seeing, or if I'm communicating well, is mostly people spend just about all their focus only in the mindscape and landscape. So being happy about feedback is mindscape, like feeling good that you achieved your goal, thinking about whether you're progressing your goal, that you did progress your goal. Thinking about what you need to do. Okay, I need to do this, then I need to do this. Normally what we call planning involves the mindscape. You're planning how to achieve your goal, what actions to take to achieve your goal, what your projections are, what your expectations are. When you're feeling frustrated or when you're feeling exuberant, when you're feeling like you're great because you accomplished something, or whether you're feeling angry or bored, or when you're saying I want this or I want that. Nothing wrong with saying I want, right? Like I want to install this new graphic is not like inherently wrong, right? That's a fine thing to do or to think if that's what you need to do for your e-commerce website. So there's nothing wrong about the mindscape, but normally people are stuck there. And to normally for people being unstuck, you're still in the mindscape and you're struggling and you're sticking to it and you're having more motivation and more energy, or you're trying to be more organized, or you're trying to find information or a coach or a guru to help you get what you want. And it's all on this level of where the goals themselves are taking on this sort of ultimate reality, where they're very real. And real is actually, this is something I'll also plan to develop separately, but I'll indicate it now. There's so many related ideas. It's not so much that I'm scattered as there's just a lot of context to what we're talking about. We're building a whole model, right, for things. That's why I have months of doing alchemy planned. I may well be scattered, but there's also the nature of the what we're talking about. Anyhow, don't want to make myself forget again. So I was saying mindscape, reality. I was saying real. When people say, "Oh, it's real," right, or we talk about reality, or when goals feel real, real actually is essentially synonymous with foundational. And when I talked earlier in the, I think the second webinar, about the idea of arbitrary, of how people's reasons for doing things, and the reasons that our mind is perfectly content with arbitrary reasons, reasons that in and of themselves don't have reasons, or maybe there's a reason for the reason but it doesn't terminate anywhere. If you go down to 1 or 2 or 3 layers, you just get to nothing in people's reasons for doing things, their justifications, and their whole model for the world is kind of based on nothing. So and people's idea of reality itself is actually that way. It is not foundational. But reality means foundational. And so people treat it as if it's foundational. They believe that it's foundational, and they act and they believe as if it's foundational as well when it's not. So goals take on this feeling like they're real. When you're only aware of the mindscape, it's metaphorical to thinking that the physical world is real in a way that it's not, and is real in a way that's foundational, and it's not. And if you try to make the physical world, or your idea of the physical world, foundational, you end up confused and tangled up. And the way people defend against that is they just kind of shrink their goals and their thinking so that it's within what they can deal with, within having the physical world be the foundation. All right, so with when you're looking at the goalscape, then you are thinking about whether you want to have certain goals, or what goals you want to be active right now and which ones you don't want cluttering your mind. And when there's new information or just events proceed, then you understand you can shift your goals so that you can expect something to happen, or you can go to try to get something done by a certain deadline, but then you can explicitly or intentionally shift your goals. Another great way to see the mindscape, when you start to see these things this way, this whole idea with the goalscape, mindscape, landscape, your ability to deal with other people will be transformed. Suppose I'm on the phone with someone else and they are telling me about how someone did something to them and how that's bad. In most or all cases, if I were to ask that person who's talking to me, where are we headed with this? What's the point in talking about this? Then when I try to talk about the goalscape, it's like it would be disorienting and kind of confusing, because the goalscape isn't really a place where people are normally looking. They don't realize hardly that it exists. And so for them, there's just this goal in their mind to feel like a sense of justice, or to work out something about how this person's like a jerk, or wronged them. But there's some, or maybe they're trying to protect their self-image. Whatever it is, they just feel like they want to do it. But if I ask them where they're heading with it, then they can't tell me. Now, normally I don't do that, because, of course, that just doesn't feel good for other people, and I'm not looking to put myself in a position of just jacking with someone, right, and messing with them. But I'm using this by way of illustrating this concept, that if the other person and yourself are aware of the goalscape, then if things get off temporarily, if we're just sitting around judging another person, now if we're deciding what we're going to do, if someone's saying, listen, I'm trying to decide whether I need to break a partnership up with somebody, or whether I'm going to start a new venture with someone, and they start that way, and then they say, well, and here's some of the ways that this person has behaved in a way that I don't think is going to be helpful. Now, even then, separately, you can look out for confirmation bias, where are we really looking at the whole picture and the whole time that we've been dealing with them, and the whole context like we should, or are we just biased and trying to confirm that this other person, is kind of bad. But if we're deciding what we're going to do, then that's and just by thinking about that, thinking about the idea of, wait a second, if I'm thinking about someone else and judging their thoughts or their actions, it only makes sense in the context of what I'm going to do. Then that type of thought is a goalscape thought, that now you're thinking about your goals, but not about achieving your goals, but about what your goals should be. Now, once in a while, people will do an exercise that looks a bit like what I'm saying, where, but I'll say the exercise, but the exercise is just going to turn out to be pretty much staying within the mindscape and just trying to get it aligned. All right. And it's like thinking, well, what should my goals be, or what should my priorities be? And then if people are like, well, I want this, and well, I want that, you see how if you're thinking about what your goals should be, or what you want your goals to be, then all you're really doing is looking at the mindscape and reporting on it. That doesn't mean that's all that's going on. That exercise might cause somebody to start to glance into the goalscape a little bit. But often they're just looking, it's a little bit like doing an exercise where you're looking around and saying, well, what's really going on around in the landscape? Let me just look around. What's really happening right now? And what's happening in my business, and writing that down. That would be reflecting on the landscape, right? Or just kind of reporting on the landscape, or describing the landscape. If someone's kind of describing the landscape, they can sort of align it a bit better, and they might do a little bit of goalscaping. But you're really, if people were really focused on the goalscape, they would all come up with the same couple of realizations that I talked about already here, and that I've talked about often. Two of those realizations are, how do we know what's true, is the central question, or the first question we have to answer in life, once we're aware and able to do that. And the other is that, well, the ultimate goal, or the only real goal, is for the world to be perfect, and at that point we can have more good through caring and creating and so forth. But if people are not coming to those conclusions, then they're not sticking in the goalscape very much, or very clearly, because those are pretty major conclusions that would be reached if someone's stuck in the goalscape. So whether or not people dabble, or whether a particular person's suggestion, or whether a particular exercise dabbles in it, is a reasonable question to ask. But it's not that important primarily. What's important is it doesn't matter how much you've been doing this in the past, right? That's like a self-image question. How smart am I already? Instead, the issue is understanding this better and better, and operating in the goalscape whenever it's going to be helpful. So when is it helpful? essence, in a sense, it's primary. Like it's not so much that we want to think, well, by default, I'm in the mindscape and landscape, and then I just go to the goalscape because I have to, right? That's looking at things backwards. You want the goalscape to be primary. Again, go to the illustration or the metaphor of a person who likes to watch TV and play video games, but that has to have their real life be okay for them to do that, right? A certain amount of time each day might be reasonable to watch TV and or play video games, but you don't really organize your life necessarily around video games and TV, and then just inconveniently tend to your real life, right? That's kind of a backwards way of looking at things. So maybe that metaphor can help illustrate. You foundationally and primarily want to be understanding, all right, well, the final goal is such and such, and the whole point, and people, it can feel unimportant to know to know how to see what ideas are really true. And the reason it feels unimportant, the reason that question, how do I know what's true, on some level feels very unimportant to people, right? People can just feel sleepy when I start talking about it, like literally, or they can listen, but just in the day-to-day life, it just doesn't get used. But it will get used if you're operating in the goalscape. Then it will feel important because you're trying to figure out what goals are the ones that are going to get you to the best results, the best goodness, or the best like kind of navigation, because there's kind of large goals that you might have, like having an e-commerce site that's ranking on Google and making money. If we think of that as kind of it's a sub-goal to like the ultimate goal of everything being perfect, but it's a fairly large goal, or a goal like $10,000 a month income, right? That's a kind of a bit of a complex goal. So on the way to that more complex goal, then you can have sub-goals. If you think of life like your mind or your brain is like this mechanism that you move around with like magnets. This is an okay illustration, just as kind of a starter illustration. It's oversimplified for sure, but it's kind of, you'll probably find this helpful. You probably like it almost as I say it. So think of your mind or your brain, and you're like leading around with magnets, and those magnets are your little goals, right? Even your next goal for the next 5 minutes or for the next half an hour, or a particular task that leads your mind around, right? Your mind pursues goals, right? So if you think of it like a little animal or mechanism, but a nice one, it's great. I mean, your mind is a wonderful thing that you're interacting with, right? It's hugely impactful on the goodness and the badness or lack thereof that you experience and that other people experience, right? Your mind interacts with others, through your body, through the world, right? I don't mean like in some psychic way or not. I'm not talking about that. But obviously you interact with others in this world, just in the simple way. So I mean no disrespect toward my mind or yours, right, when I look at it this way, but it's a great illustration. So you're moving it around with magnets, but then what do? Even as I talk about moving it around with magnets, what am I doing to the magnet? I'm moving the magnet. The magnet's the goal that your mind is pursuing. And then as it moves and as the environment shifts, right, because time goes by, your mind learns and you gain knowledge, and then the environment shifts and stuff goes on, and you do stuff on your website, and now certain things are built and you need to do another thing. So you're moving it around, you see? So even just that illustration, you're moving the goal. But your mind, and remember I said people identify with their mind. And so when people think they are their mind, they get immersed in that, like thinking they're a character in the TV show, and then they're like busy trying to pursue the goals in the mindscape, and they're looking at the landscape, feeling the mindscape, and no one's moving the magnet around, so to speak. Again, that's a little oversimplified. I'm not saying that you directly move magnets around. You kind of indirectly ultimately move magnets around when you understand, but it's good for now to at least start here. So no one's moving the magnet. Your mind actually doesn't want the magnet to move. Imagine that you're teaching a child to swim, right? And they're swimming to you, like in the pool. Then they don't want you to move, right? Now you need to move, like you'll move back so they swim more, right? But they don't want you to move because they're trying to get to where you are, right? Your mind doesn't want the goal to move, do you see? So your mind is going to fight you, but it doesn't need to fight you. That's why we need to change the game. People that are just trying to make the world better, their mind's always going to fight them and try to get them to not move their goals around. When you have a vision for the world to be perfect, then everything's going to change. It changes the game, and this is why you want to trust me, because I'll tell you these things, and then over time I'll explain to you why they're so incredibly important. But I can't explain everything at once. Life is going to be a struggle until and unless you have the faith to go for making the world perfect. And one of the reasons I talk about God is because that's all part of it. And it's part of the understanding how to go for this and that it's possible, that the game is rigged. You see, it's all relevant. Why? Because your mind doesn't want the goals to move. Why? Because your mind is trying to achieve the current goals always. Part of achieving a goal is the mind doesn't want it to move. But your mind's not aware. It's like a car. A car doesn't want you to steer it. A car doesn't want you to put the brakes on. Do you see what I mean? Like in the terminology I'm using. So your mind doesn't want you to. It's not intentionally fighting you. It's fighting you like the car is fighting you applying the brakes. Now, of course, the car also, if you have power brakes, and part of it helps you too. So maybe that's part of the metaphor. Maybe it's like having power brakes, where your mind will help you. But there's a way that I understand, and I look at all this. But part of it is understanding about God, and part of it is understanding about the world being perfect, where you'll move your goals around in a way where your mind won't want to fight you, and your mind will want it. So that's a huge angle on changing the game, is when your mind wants the goals to change because of how things get rewired and how your whole model makes it so that makes sense to your brain and to your mind. Outside of my model, if I tell someone about the goalscape, they're just always going to have resistance and struggling anyway. So we need to have the whole model. We have to change the game. We can't just get nuggets from what I'm saying. You have the nuggets, it'll be nifty, it'll help you win this, it'll help you struggle if you get nuggets. And that's better. People will say, oh, this is great. I'm struggling and I'm winning instead of struggling and losing. That's nice. I'm glad. I prefer that for you. But where you really want to get to is where you're actually not even struggling. And you're just winning. I didn't say I'm here to fight and win. I didn't say I'm fighting for you. I'm not. I want us all to win together. We don't have to struggle. We just need to understand. Okay. Well, that eventually came out pretty well. It's good. Takes me a little while to get going, but sometimes. All right, let's see what we got here toward the end. The 10x rule because you're moving the goals ahead. Yeah, anything. I'm actually not directly familiar with the 10x rule. Is that Vanderchuck or is that someone else? I know you've referred to it before, Jeremy, and I've heard other people refer to it. Right. Oh my God. OMG. Light bulb. Great. We got a light bulb for Joanne today. I probably got a few light bulbs. Excellent. Love it. Great. Grant Cardone. There we go. Right. I knew it was. Right. Anything that makes it easier for you to operate in the goalscape is going to be great. And once you start seeing, once you start seeing things in terms of the goalscape, then my fear video was helpful because it gave you one kind of done-for-you application where I showed how your mind was getting stuck in a certain place, right? When you start to see things in terms of the goalscape, then you can say, all right, I'm feeling frustrated because on the goalscape, my mind is going after this goal in this way, and it feels like the path should be like a certain way, and there's an obstacle there that like shouldn't be there. And then you're in the mindscape. You can only feel frustrated in the mindscape. And again, the mindscape's not bad. Just like watching a TV isn't bad. And even better than watching TV, just like playing a sport and really getting into it, getting into the game, isn't bad. Or identifying with your body is helpful in that you feel the motion and the forces on your body, right, in a way that can be helpful until and unless it's not helpful. So identifying with your body has all sorts of uses, except for when it's not useful. Operating in the mindscape or the landscape is not bad at all. But whenever you're frustrated, you shift to the goal. You'll come to understand, or maybe you already got it. But that would be quick if you already got it. I don't mean like you should, or if you're smart enough, you already got it. But whenever you're frustrated, you shift to the goalscape. You understand, wait a second, that comes from the mind thinking that there should be a path, but obviously that path never existed, right? It was my mind projected that it should be this distance, so to speak, or this amount of effort, or I should perform these actions. I should send these number of links to my website, and it should rank, right, on page 1. And if you do those links and it doesn't rank on page 1, then it never was the case, right? That path never existed where you send that number of links and your website ranks on page 1. Or that you write a certain sales letter and you rank it on page 1 and then a certain amount of people buy. If you thought that's what should happen, but it isn't happening, then that never was real. And so when you shift to the goalscape, you understand, okay, that never was the case. There never was that path. So the path isn't blocked because the path never existed. And by doing that, now I found out that path didn't exist. So where do I move the goals around in a way that's useful? And then every time you can dissolve frustration. And I'm speaking of years of experience doing this. And it's very real. And anger is similar. Anger is when it's like you feel like a person's doing it intentionally or through negligence. Then, like when it's kind of personal, then there's anger in a way that you don't want. And then there may be some useful form of anger, but feeling anger uncontrollably or when it's not intentional, at least that's obviously not helpful. And then frustration is when there's no person involved, when it's just sort of circumstance. And yet, if you anthropomorphize, like if you feel like the people who designed, Excel should have done it better, then even though it's like your computer that you're dealing with, you can still feel angry instead of frustrated. If you feel like a person, is kind of somewhere, or that you are dealing with a person. Or if your car seems like it's behaving like a person and you kind of feel like it's kind of like a person, then it could be anger instead of frustration. But they're both kind of two sides of the same coin. Another one of a zillion ways this will help you is Liz talked about what made her world class in poker was getting coaching on not going on tilt. What would happen is basically pretty much all poker players apparently, or at least maybe some of the worst ones are just so unskilled that it wouldn't matter. But the good ones, they would be good, but they would go on tilt once in a while where they would just kind of lose it, like psychologically. And they would just make ridiculous moves and risks and so forth. And she got a coach that showed her how to not do that. And when you're partnering with people, then if you just eliminate kind of going on tilt once in a while, right? Like if you kind of lose it, even in your own head, even if you don't think they can hear, like even if it's not in front of them and it's in your own mind, you're still going to act and talk a little differently, probably. And if you go on tilt every once in a while with people, then it'll tend to blow up your relationships, or it'll make them impoverished. Your relationship might limp along, but everything's so much more difficult. Just one of a zillion ways that you can do everything right. You can have all the skills, you can have all the personality skills, and be great at sales, and look great, and then you go on tilt, and you don't know how to not do that. And that might take something very, very deep, so to speak, like what the world would call deep. Well, I don't think it is deep at all, right, this stuff. To me, this is where we should be. This is exactly the right place to be. But if that's going to blow up your relationships no matter what else you do, or blow them up in a way that makes them just way less productive, and where people have to like boundary you a little bit, right, because they know you might just kind of go off in them at any time, or they sense it, then again, you could do everything else right. You could have built so much, and it all kind of, you're locked out of where you could be. And maybe it takes a lot of context to understand all that, but then we'll do that together. It actually isn't going to take long at all, right? So what if it takes a couple of months to really get to where you don't go on tilt with people and start judging them and getting upset at them and so forth? You can decide strategically, especially if you can do it in a clear-headed way, whether or not you want to do another venture with someone, or another contract, or another agreement. But other than that, all that alone, if it takes you a few months to never have to not make all your relationships that much more difficult, then and relationships don't have to appear difficult. Remember, nobody's pulled off, or few, and no one that I know of has pulled off something like OMG. We have like 8 people joint venturing and operating in a lot of harmony and in very good harmony with me. I just don't have issues with any of the people that I work with. And people just don't pull that off typically, or anywhere. They don't pull off anything close to that. Typically, even if they're successful, they don't pull that kind of thing off. And boy, does it make life easy if you can do that. Absolutely, that's why I put them on MP3s too, to make it easier. Julie, which said, thank God we get a chance to watch replays because my head hurts in the nicest possible way. And I'm pretty much done with the new stuff here. I'll just talk to you guys for a while, and then we'll be done. Ah, Carol. Any chance you can get this recording of this transcribed? It would save me. Okay, we'll consider that. A little bit of cost to doing that and so forth, but if it's so helpful, then that might be a good thing. No tell it was. Let me address Carol's question here. She said, David, I have a question about how our goals get warped and shift to getting feedback because we get hooked on the feedback. I understand, right? I illustrated this pretty well when it came to dating and relationships, right? Like if a guy needs to hear from a girl that he's validated and so forth. See if Carol's. Oh wow, you're doing it now. And you can share the ones you've done, and then we can get them maybe transcribed in the future. Let's see here. I understand how it can happen in dating relationships, but what about making money? If my goal is to get to a certain income or have a certain number of clients, and the feedback that comes is people filling out my discovery form, setting appointments, and so forth, how does that become addictive? Okay, so what if things are just going along well? You know, people are filling out your discovery form and they're setting appointments with you. Is there some kind of problem? Is that really like needing a girl to sleep with you when what you want is a good relationship? I mean, sleep with you immediately, right, as like feedback, or else you feel panicked. As I elaborated on that in a previous webinar, I won't go through it all. And then when I talked about mindscape, part of why I talked about that was to help illustrate this, where operating in the mindscape is great until it's not, right? So if what you don't want is your goals, your kind of sub-goals, a little magnet you're using to move your mind towards where you want it to get to, let's say you're trying to hit $10,000 a month with client consulting, then you don't want to accidentally have this goal to get discovery forms filled out and setting appointments take over and take you in the wrong direction. It might never take you in the wrong direction, but at least you want to be able to watch out for if it could. And you might say, well, how could it? Maybe someone's filling out your discovery form and things are going okay, but maybe you could also take some time to think about how that whole process could be even better. There's a way that you can feel satisfied because you're hitting these sub-goals and then you feel like you must be on the way to your 5-figure-a-month goal, but you need to stop and reflect and make sure that you are going there as efficiently as you can figure out. But you might be headed straight for where you're trying to get to, and then that's fine. But you just want to be able to be aware of that. And if you ever start to feel frustrated or overconfident, if you want to watch, one of the red flags if you just get too much tunnel vision. If you get so into, like take me with Alchemy. I appreciate and I think it helps motivate and everything to get I'm getting more positive feedback than I supposed at this point. It's greatly exceeding my expectations. So, but if I start to get tunnel vision for that, where I start to think, oh, okay, and then, or my mind by accident ends up making that like kind of the new goal is to get positive feedback, then a couple of things can happen. One is if I'm already getting more of it than I think I expected, then my mind can kind of dial it back a few gears. And remember, it's not me, so it could just put less of its own creativity into developing Alchemy and thinking how to explain it better and organize it and so forth. So it can just start to meander into other things that I might not want it to meander. Like again, it can start to feel demotivated because it shifts back a few gears because I'm already ahead of the game with it. right, in my illustration here of getting positive feedback. So instead, when I get more positive feedback than I thought, then I go to my goalscape and I make sure that my goals are aligned in a way that accelerates me, right? That my brain gets more creative. And a couple of people now have posted that their daughters are listening to it. And so, wow, I mean, that's kind of impactful if you have young people listening, and then that can make such a difference too. And so, and it's an honor. And so, again, I kind of shift around on the goalscape to make sure that's all accelerating me towards where I want to get to, which is getting as many people as possible over fully to my model. And fully doesn't mean like full understanding. It means like over a certain threshold where you're playing a different game, you're standing in the right place, and you're filling out a lot of the model. And then I'm still filling out more of the model that I'm using, right? So I don't even have it all figured out, even me. Okay, but so it's not about understanding everything, but there is a way that you can fully get your feet on the right ground, or get in a different playing field, the right playing field. And I want to get as many people over to that as possible. And so as the environment shifts, as feedback comes in, I want to make sure that feedback is getting aligned with my mind accelerating more towards the final goal that or the sub goal at least that I'm working on, making sure I still want that sub goal, but that sub goal is pretty obviously good for now for the next few months, right? It's boundaried already by being I'm working on this for a few months, and we'll just see how it all goes. But part of seeing how it all goes is that my mind is really working in overdrive on this consistently, which is what is good for a few months. Then I can rest, after that for some amount of time, or my mind can and such, in a certain way. And then maybe I start to let it rest, and it feels great in a couple of days, or maybe it's going to need a few months. Who knows? But I'll get a sense then too, right? But I know that I'll do this, or my mind will do this, or I'll do this with my mind, we could say, and then I'll let it rest from that for a little while, and then go from there. And the rest also opens up a new space, right? Where it's not just going toward another goal. Sometimes I like to drop all goals, except for kind of the final one. And that that way there's not like this inertia towards something that's keeping me from seeing properly and such. All right, looks like the transcriptions had a lot of votes. I have a sub-goal of the discovery form, but so far nobody's filling it out. Trying to apply each step I've learned so well, but wonder if I'm stuck in Mindscape, even though it may be positive movement. If you find that you're trying to have a breakthrough, right? And when you're trying to have a breakthrough, then you don't want to just be bashing through the front gate, right? Whenever you're trying to like bash through, I'm being a little metaphorical here, but whenever there's kind of like this stuck amount, then you want to zoom out. And a lot of things I'm talking about here are things that I've developed and have planned to talk about at some point in the future. But sometimes questions just sort of get me to touch on things, or there's kind of when I address questions, it's sort of a bit of a separate track where it lets a sort of kind of build out context here and there, somewhat at random, but it's helpful, I think, in a number of ways. But anyhow, whenever you're stuck with trying to achieve a goal, even if it's a sub-goal, then you're going to want to zoom out, so to speak, right? You want to look more at in this case, really the landscape, right? To try to figure out how to when you're looking at the goalscape encompasses the landscape and the mindscape, right? It subsumes them. It's kind of a higher. People talk about a higher perspective, right, or a better perspective. Then obviously, in order to think about where you want your goals to be, you have to be thinking about what goals you currently have, what's useful, and just all sorts of thoughts about the landscape in order to do that. right? So basically you want to zoom out and just think about the whole situation, and you can also think about where you might get potential ideas for help, and you're poking around to try to get a foothold. One of the very important concepts, and that's very counterintuitive, and that I talk about it here and there, but it's very important, is the framework idea versus details, or a foothold versus trying to climb up a mountain. And so when people are poking around to try to find a breakthrough or a foothold or a framework, then it feels wrong. It feels like they're not doing things right. But you are doing it right. If you don't know how to break through, you need to poke around. If you don't have a foothold, you need to look for one. If you don't have a framework, you need to be looking at details and dealing with details until one develops, at which point you'll find you hardly remember any of the details, but the framework got developed. And that constantly feels wrong and disorienting, and like everyone's going ahead of you. One of my thoughts I had during this week is the idea of the tortoise and the hare contains an assumption, or kind of it locks us out of another perspective, which is the tortoise and the hare idea is like, well, do you want to try to zoom forward and maybe burn yourself out, or do you kind of pace yourself? But what if there's a guy who sits there at the starting line developing like a rocket ship or a race car or whatever, and it looks like he's going nowhere for a long time until he gets it built, but then boom, right, zoom. Now, if you don't have to go very far, the race car might not be necessary. If you ever understand how to just get something, if there's just fruit sitting there for you to pick, then pick it. You don't need to develop a picking mechanism. And that's a bit of a metaphor, but this happens a lot, I think, with people and employees. They'll be doing a pretty simple, mundane task that they're able to do, and they'll think, I need to have an employee do this. And, well, not necessarily. I mean, having an employee is a whole thing in and of itself. I think mostly people do it for self-image reasons. Of course, at some point, you might need employees, for sure. But when you have that type of thought, I mean, the fruit's right there. You're picking it. You're fine. I mean, I've gotten, to the 15 to 20 million range for my business, and multiple six figures for personal income with 0 employees. So this whole idea that you need employees to start, and Cotton's way bigger, right, in terms of personal income. He's like 3 or 4 times mine, with basically no employees. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't have employees, but what it does mean is that thinking that you're above this task and that task is just a silly way of thinking. You can just get rid of that. So anyway, if there's a fruit, you can just pick it. If the finish line is within sight and you can just run there, you wouldn't have to build a race car. You just run to the finish line. But if it's far, far away, and it's pretty clear or potentially clear that you can't just run there, then you build the race car. And while other people are busy running, and often running in circles, and I did this, right, overall in life, this whole idea of how to know what's true, there's your rocket ship. And people do everything but that. But I figured that out, and then everything else is easy as heck in life. Sorry, just reading here. I guess I should say something. That really helps. Where I was getting hung up was thinking of that feedback the same way as relationship feedback, which can produce endorphins that are addictive. Money feedback is a little different. Maybe for you, Carol, and you're lucky. I said this in a totally fun way. I think plenty of people get the endorphin feedback with the money probably as well. Although, yeah, I don't know whether I do either as well, but plenty of people do. I'm not sure if they're lucky or unlucky. But I just said that for fun. I'm glad that helped. David, when I look back and think about it, it seems that when I am most productive, goals are vague and I'm not paying much attention to them. But the more I focus on goals, the more anxious I become. Is this well, actually, this is the distinction between the mindscape, goalscape, and landscape. It might turn out that you want to have very little focus in the mindscape. I'll think about this some more. And you can too. You have a lot of the tools now, or the illustrations to work from. But maybe you want to spend most of your focus in the landscape or the goalscape, right, so to speak. And you can be in flow in the landscape, and then know when to also be looking at the at the goalscape, and maybe thinking about that I want this, I want that, or damn, I'm frustrated. Maybe that's where we want to always avoid, and I'll work on that myself some more, as I said. I'm so glad you brought this up and asked the question this way. David, how do we build a mental toughness so that we have a strategy to achieve goals faster? My first reaction, which might not be my wisest, or my deep, there might be more good stuff to say. I don't really think in terms of mental toughness. I think in terms of having a better foundation and a better overall understanding, so that we have a strategy. How do we measure the effectiveness of our strategies so we have a strategy to achieve goals faster? I like that question a lot, though. I'll be working on that and using it to kind of help me develop ways to explain things to you guys, and that'll be helpful. I don't think this will be one of the 3-hour ones. This will be more like a 2-hour webinar today. Like playing Risk or the old Age of Empires or maybe Clash of Clans. You may take a while to build, but then look out. Absolutely. Yeah, and I've just done this over and over again, and including had people wondering what the heck I was doing or why I didn't seem to be moving or making progress. And then it feels like when you're doing it, when you're building that race car or that rocket ship or whatever, it can feel even to yourself like maybe I'm doing it wrong, maybe I'm just copping out, maybe it's just an excuse for picking my navel, right? But generally it's not an excuse. Generally it's really worked out great when I've done things that way, and I'm embracing it more and more. But it's tough, it's counterintuitive. It sounds brilliant to say, right? Build a race car first and then zoom past. But in practice it can really feel wrong and it can look wrong. One thing that this really helped me is to realize that, look, when you understand, as you build your understanding, you're going to reach out and pick fruit. When you see the finish line, you're going to sprint to it, no problem. No one's going to be, working on stuff and then not just accomplish things when it's clearly in sight. And another thing is that, what was I going to say? Oh, taking action is part of building a race car, right? Like, first of all, you're moving around and taking action when you're building the race car. You might do a bit of planning, but one way that I avoid doing this the wrong way, where I'm kind of building my plan, building my understanding, building my rocket ship, is that as a rule of thumb, I spend about half the time actually taking action, but then I'm taking action in order to improve my understanding. A little bit like how I do my recordings. Ever since I started, it's never like easy for me to do a recording or to do a live webinar. It's still, in a sense, hard, but it's hard looked at one way and it's not hard looked at another way. But I'm still trying to understand how to explain this stuff better. But I plan a lot and I work on what I'll say, and I worked for a few months. Starting in February, I've been working explicitly on Alchemy, and a lot, like hours, many days, and a lot of most all my creative focus has been on it. So I prepared without doing anything, but then at some point I was just going to go ahead and take action and further my understanding that way. And of course it's working. I'm furthering my understanding, I'm helping people, but I'm still really in the stage for myself of building a framework in terms of explaining things. I'm not really, I really understand my own model and framework very, very well, but in terms of understanding how to explain it, I have no problem with how I'm doing now, but it's not like I have it all. Or maybe I have a framework for explaining it, but I don't have the details worked out. When I have the details worked out really well, where it all kind of is just like clockwork, then that may come in a few years, and then it'll just look like one of those presentations where someone has it all prepared, and it's just like we're going to go through this way and that way, and I know, I'd look like I know what I'm doing even better. But one way or the other, it's an illustration of how I'm taking action to further my understanding. And in a sense, I'm always furthering my understanding of the ultimate goal, right? Of having the world be perfect in a way where there's no more bad ideas being acted on. And by the way, we're achieving the idea of no bad ideas being worked on through spreading ideas that are correct and knowably correct, and not through like greater good type things or like violence or whatever. The violence might be okay in self-defense against a clear property rights violation, but that's only like a holding pattern. Nothing. It's not gonna. You're not gonna get rid of bad. You might preserve your stable base through violence, but it's not gonna. It's not ever what just so nothing's ever misunderstood. We're not going to get there through coercion and so forth. Breakthrough tonight. I was struggling with the idea of pursuing the goal of a perfect world. It was fighting with the idea of the Buddha's Zen idea of detachment from right or wrong. But now I see the why so clearly and how my mind had warped these other ideas to bloom my goals. Love it. That's wonderful, Jen. I'm so glad. Yeah, it's weird, right? Because it seems like such kind of a deep or religious or maybe pseudo-political type of idea with this world being perfect, or is it necessary for success? But yeah, as you see the place I'm standing and this where some of you might be standing now, it's all one comprehensive view that goes with how the mind works and everything, and it's not. It's not like religious or political or deep in any. Those are just kind of silly categories, essentially. I still try to stay away from things that are overtly those categories for the most part, whenever it's not kind of an example that I really want to use, or if if I don't kind of announce it ahead of time or something like that, just to make it a little easier for people to start with. But I don't. It's not really about that, right? It gets deeper than that. Build a race car first, then zoom past. That's huge. Excellent. This also brings clarity to why so many people who want to do good act so helpless and disdain money, because they have a goal to do good as a way to be fulfilled or happy. Yeah, there's a way that it's so easy to dumb down your goals and to kind of make your own standards when you just have this idea of trying to make the world better. In the way that I understand things, money may or may not be relevant in a sense. Like it certainly isn't the case that I think that everyone needs to make a lot of money at all. But it also, for certain people, their path can involve making a lot of money. You know, there's two things going on in the world. When I talk about good and bad being separate tracks, getting rid of bad is only going to happen through understanding and dissolving contradictions, and therefore the bad ideas, the ideas that lead to bad from contradictions. We all want to be pursuing that goal fully, and then in as much as we're communicating with others, will naturally come from that place and help them with that. And then we can also create good through whatever, that can be our mission or our calling. That has to do with making more good. But unless we're looking to dissolve all bad, and clearly dissolving all bad, and this helps me to further explain what I mean, actually. I hadn't really put it just like this before. Again, if we see good and bad as the same type of thing, just more or less, more good is, more, again, if it's the same type of thing, that leads to all sorts of incorrect conclusions, or blurred conclusions. So on one track, you can create a bunch of good in the world, and that you can't max that out. For some of us, the good that we're going to be creating is going to lead to a whole bunch of money for ourselves, and then we can use that money even more to help incentivize and build stuff that is more good. For others of us, the good that we have the talent to create may not involve so much money. I don't know, and maybe it might involve hardly any money, right? Maybe it might involve none, and a charity might support us, and that might be totally correct. Then when we distinguish, without distinguishing good and bad, we can't have this thought that I'm giving you now. The bad needs to be fully dissolved, and that's what's missing. is any philosophy, in generally in philosophies, any philosophy that waves their hand at dissolving bad, fully, 100%, is not getting it, and there's going to always be a struggle. Because first of all, the struggle comes from just having the contradictions in one's own mind. But then also, the mind can just find a way to rationalize and dumb down its standards as long as bad's okay. Right? But if bad's not okay, then being frustrated isn't okay. And being frustrated about being frustrated isn't okay. It needs to stop. See, the mind doesn't want to stop. But if bad's not okay, it has to stop. It's still. It's kind of by default still. And default is another idea that I want to develop with you guys. This is my issue when I'm preparing, is I have so many things I don't know what to do first. We need to get to the point where, and so the nice thing about this kind of question answer discussion time is it lets me just kind of say things somewhat at random that I can discuss more formally in the kind of the monologue time. It's kind of a good organizational strategy. But now I can just talk at random, which is somewhat freeing. We want there to be a certain stillness to our minds, of course. People know this, and they try to achieve it through meditation and so forth. And meditation can be great. I compared it to fitness and so forth. There's certainly a positive. But meditation itself is weirdly less necessary when there's a way, and this relates to the goalscape. When you're doing things in the way that I'm showing you, or standing in the place that I'm showing you, there's a way that your mind can be still by default, and then you have it work on a goal, and then it kicks in. And if you have it work on a goal and declutter it, where it's fully, congruently working on a goal without being hedging, right, and in all sorts of ways, and you have like good boundaries within which you can do whatever, it can kind of do whatever it takes, then my mind is kind of doing whatever it takes or at rest. And that's maybe a tiny bit idealized, but it's pretty reasonable description of how life is for me and how my mind operates. And it's shocking, and it's not like how it was for the part of my life before I figured this out. And then there was a transition period where I had breakthroughs, but I had to figure more and more stuff out and dissolve more and more. And there's still incorrect ideas in my mind that I dissolve, for sure. But the difference now is actually I've dissolved a heck of a lot of blocks and contradictions and so forth. So there's way less, at least, than there were. And so it's pretty true that for the most part, and very large part, that my mind is either still or it's working whatever it takes on a particular goal creatively. And that relates to this idea that if bad is okay, then your mind can always be working, and then it can be frustrated, and it can be frustrated that it's frustrated, and then it can be motivating you. See, if bad's okay, and your mind's trying to achieve goals, then all you do is you just find more pain. It finds a way to give you more pain for not achieving like a goal, and it tries to motivate you with pain, and more pain than whatever you're trying to struggle against. So life is very painful even as you're succeeding, because it's like you're trying to use greater pain to break through an obstacle that where you have like avoidance, or like you have approach avoidance where you want to get to the other side of something. You want to approach a potential client or a relationship partner, and then there's pain of rejection in between, and so you need even more pain in the other behind you, right, to propel you forward to get you through the smaller pain. And some major success teachers will talk about this as if it's the only way, and it's effective within the normal worldview. It is the correct way to operate. At least you feel a bunch of pain, or you imagine a bunch of pain, but you have to immerse yourself in it a little bit, and then you're so scared of that, or you so much don't want that you break through and you get to success. And life could be a process of that, but then also that whole world isn't. There's more consequences of that than just the pain that you're feeling. There's a way that when you're playing there, your brain's going to constantly be struggling against you moving goals. Once you take bad off the table fully as something that is like okay, where it's always like a red flag, then your mind's always like, all right, well, what do we do? um, and then you find ways to clear the playing field for go after certain goals, stipulate that that's what you want, and then you can go for it fully, and it's all good. And then if you encounter frustration, then you understand where that's coming from. I'm at the point now where I don't really, almost completely don't feel frustrated. There can be maybe some things that get triggered here and there from my past or something or other, but it's very, very rare. And when it happens, I can generally dissolve it pretty quickly. And my point is not to brag or some crap like that, but just to give you a sense of that is realistic to get there, and just with what I'm talking about. Yeah, exactly. Detachment. Anyone can just crawl in a hole. Like here's a fascinating thing. By doing this whole alchemy project that I'm doing right now, since I agreed to do that, or I didn't, I kind of agreed with myself, so to speak, and then told others that I would do it, and then had them support me, like Mike is supportive and other people are supportive, but they're kind of involved. Their support involves them being involved and having to invest, right? And now you guys, right, you count on it. I'll wake up sometimes with more of a sense of like unease or creative tension than I did before I committed to it, where I was just kind of working on it. I'm most happy when I'm just developing ideas and thinking about things, and there's not like a place I have to perform. And then now that I'm doing this, then I thought I'd open it up to affiliates and so forth, where they could promote it, and that creates an additional kind of pressure there. I can dissolve that sense of unease, but I could have. My point is that I could have just not strived to do this, and then I could report to you that I'm happy as a clam. I have all the money I need. Life is so easy, and I never feel uneasy and so forth by just staying within a certain box. And by doing this and feeling the unease, I think I'll also understand how not to feel unease in the future. I had that triggered that hadn't been dissolved yet. So I'm not reporting to it saying what would normally happen is the guru would describe this and then say, you see, you feel uneasy when you strive for something, you break out of the box. I actually don't think I'll need to feel uneasy once I figure out where that's coming, like not just where that's coming from, but the meta also of where it's coming from. And I should be able to dissolve that even more fully in the future. And I dissolve it pretty quickly now when it comes up, but where I don't even feel it, sometimes waking up in the morning. But it doesn't have to be that way. But again, by not even striving at all, I could have said, oh, I have it all figured out. I never feel uneasy. And that would have been false in the sense that when I did strive to do something like this, then I would have felt uneasy, but I would have been reporting, oh, I never do. Right, if I stayed within my kind of box that I was in. Take that for what you will. There's different points there. That it's easy to come across like you have things figured out if you expand out of your box. This is quite common with success and success teachers who genuinely are successful. They genuinely have gotten out of their box and gotten into a much nicer place. And now they're reporting about that. But I could do the same thing and be kind of fat and happy and saying how everything's great all the time by staying within that next box, you see. But unless they're talking about getting rid of all bad, and who did talk about that was Jesus. That's one of the many reasons why I respect Jesus so much and do actually think Jesus was God. The resurrection being one of the big ones, and prophets, there's just a whole bunch of things. But the ideas that Jesus said are quite unique. You can maybe read it into some other people, I don't know. But the way that Jesus actually said, and that's also why I say, why don't we be a little cautious about Paul? Why do we have to treat Paul like Paul was actually perfect or infallible? I don't see that. But Jesus said, like people will quote Paul, and this doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or not. It's still historical, and it's interesting to note. Okay, never do I treat Jesus or the Bible in a way where you have to accept it as true unfoundational. That's not. But I'm talking about this in kind of it's an interesting way because these are recorded in history as people said these things. So people fixate on when Paul said, well, we've all sinned and fall short of God, the glory of God, and so forth, and how we're imperfect. But when Jesus said something, Jesus says a lot of things that are shocking if you just kind of step back and don't like kind of be in a bit of a haze when you're looking at it. You kind of, again, kind of like Fletch talked about with law of implication, it's if you kind of treat Jesus in a way where you try to let Jesus break your worldview. And again, it doesn't matter what your religion is currently or whether you're a Christian or not. You can still read what Jesus wrote, right? And it's pretty interesting. I mean, it's certainly a compelling story, not just his teaching, but the whole situation that happened. There's prophecies that were fulfilled, and it was reported that he was resurrected and did all these miracles, and all the stories that are trying to explain away Jesus' resurrection don't really make a lot of sense. That in and of itself is not proof that Jesus was resurrected, but the fact that none of the stories make even the slightest bit of sense, they don't even try to make sense. Right? Things like the disciples stole the body while the guards were sleeping, and the guards saw the disciples steal the body while they were asleep, is like the main story to this day. It just doesn't make any sense. And then the disciples got all excited after stealing the body and died for the fact that they saw Jesus resurrected. Just anyhow, Jesus said, "Therefore be perfect, even as your heavenly Father is perfect." And that's surprising. Like people don't really often even remember, like notice that. But be perfect. So that's interesting, right there. So dissolving bad and so forth. So it's easy to cop out. It's easy to kind of show how you're so successful and happy, but still, if it's easy to just kind of shrink, kind of draw the line somewhere and just do that. But those people, that isn't the way to be happiest anyway. You can report and feel happy for a while doing stuff like that, but there's a whole number of problems with it. I'm not even going to keep going about it, but it's pretty. I think when you see the alternative, it makes pretty obvious sense that actually dissolving all your contradictions and going for that is going to change the game. A little summary, sure, that would be nifty. Excellent. Great. We're really getting people to helping here. Right? It's funny, right? We kind of start out and I'm talking here, talking there. Sometimes not too sure what to say first, but then things kind of come together. So a little bit of a. It looks like I stayed all on one slide here. But that's why I have months that I've scheduled for this. I started out talking about different things because what really ended up being the theme for today, I wanted to talk about the goalscape, and I think that ended up being quite successful. Doesn't mean I'm done, right? But I wanted to give a number of indications or point out a little bit where we're headed, but also a little bit of where I wanted to give you a sense of the uniqueness and the difference of where I want you to stand, not because I want you to think that I'm unique, but because it's so easy to project onto Alchemy the general success, mission-oriented, get out of the box. There's different versions of it, but it's I don't want to say all, but there's kind of a general thing, right, that I keep describing about this kind of success mindset stuff. It's very valid. It just doesn't go far enough, and it's inherently there's struggle there still, or the struggle ends by sort of giving up. But when you do that, life is going to bite you in the butt at some point. And I know behind the scenes, anytime there's an actual person that I'm aware of behind the scenes, they're often totally the real deal for what they're saying, but it's not all the way there, right? The person's not all the way there, is all I'm saying. Harder to what was I talked about the Frogger thing, that one of the things that's going to happen. So a lot of what I talked about in the beginning was trying to differentiate one or more things from at least one major version of the typical success mindset and methods that are out there. And I didn't mention this, but like the idea of like that you like navigate and keep making adjustments toward the goal, and you persevere and you keep going in a determined way, and you make the adjustments necessary. The problem with trying to make the adjustments necessary to get to setting, just trying to think, all right, what goals do I want? And then I make that goal clear and I write it down and I have pictures about it, and then I navigate my way through there and I make the adjustments and I persevere. That is like my illustration of it. It's like as long as someone can get there with like a 120-degree field of vision, right, and they can navigate within that. But there's a way that that's not going to get you to anywhere that you can't get to. There's a way that going through a big enough valley, or if you need to make a complex enough rocket ship or a race car, that you're going to feel wrong doing that type of thing in the traditional way of going after your goals. You're going to be locked out of places, and you're going to be locked out of the whole place that I've found. And I don't know how much I want to just rely on a particular accomplishment, but it is interesting how the way I put OMG together and the way that I have such a good relationship with 8 different people that I joint venture with, and it lasts year after year, and it only grows. I mean, people respect me more each year. I don't want to speak for them, but that's fairly a reasonable statement to make. And again, we don't want to read too much into a particular accomplishment. I want to limit how much I'm like the poster child for law of implication or alchemy or whatever. It's not about me. Regardless of me, the ideas are correct, and regardless of my success, the ideas are correct. But there's still a way it can be helpful as a bridge, as an indication that type of thing isn't normally done. Even very, very successful people who even make a lot more money than me, they don't manage to do that. And we could both agree they don't necessarily need to, but there's still something interesting to the idea of holding together like joint ventures are like voluntary, right? There's not a corporate structure, there's not a power structure. I don't really have power over any of the people that I'm dealing with. And yet they continue to respect me and allow me to do the role that I play, despite the fact they don't really have power in the usual way. And there's something you can accomplish if you can operate that way that you can't accomplish outside of that. And so at least that's one interesting kind of application or achievement that I've done that you can kind of see the value of. Only as much as that helps. I'm in no way saying I'm overall better than some other person again, or that if OMG fell apart for some reason it wouldn't invalidate these ideas. But again, it's a bit of a bridge or an indication. Then that might be helpful. And then I introduced the idea of the mindscape, right, and the goalscape and the landscape. And I will think about over this coming week. I'm going to think more about the mindscape and whether we want to mostly avoid it, and whether it's more of like a way of me illustrating where to avoid, or maybe not. And I'll try to think even more about this, or I will think more about it, and that'll lead to whatever understanding it leads to, and then I'll report back. And then we know when we're in the mindscape rather than the goalscape if we're kind of repeating about our goals. We're worrying about goals, if we're thinking whether we accomplished enough today to feel satisfied. If we're saying phrases like, I just want this person to do this. The more I develop this out and relate it to relationships, there's a way that I deal with relationships that's pretty unique and very helpful to add to your repertoire. You may very well have a number of things going for you in terms of being attractive, not just physically, but your energy level or things you've accomplished or whatever it might be, ways that you express yourself, your countenance, that you're are more talented than me. But then there's a piece of the puzzle that I have that's pretty unique, and that relates to navigating a goalscape. And I really don't have thoughts in dealing with other people like, I just want them to do this, I just want them to do this, how do I get them to do this? And the way that I relate to my own brain and to other people is similar. So I don't think with myself, oh, I just want this, I just want this, I just want this, right? I think about it differently than that. I think, what is it that I want to want, or that I want my brain to go after? And then, but that's very different than just thinking, I want, there's not, I don't, right, what I want isn't foundational. Like the goalscape is foundational, but I don't talk about what I want as if it has its own reality to it. There's maybe another angle on it. And by not doing that with my own mind, it allows me to also have the same model in dealing with other people's minds. And anyone from my young son who just turned 4 to my wife, to the people I work with, or friends, or just members that I talk to, whoever I communicate with, I deal on that level where I'm not thinking about what I want them to do in the same way that's normal, in this kind of way that feels very real, that can't be, it's not even that I even negotiate about it either. That's another thing I want to work on describing or explaining better in the future. Okay, that wasn't necessarily the greatest recap, but that's what we got to work with. And sometimes I read things aloud before I read them, just because if I sit here and read things to myself, then I'm just sitting here silently. And we'll wrap up in a few minutes here. David, when setting goals, I have always learned to make the goal challenging to create motivation. Not really knowing how we'll accomplish, but having confidence I'll have the ability to figure out in a big enough why, bigger than myself. How does your method differ? Yeah, this is great. This is a great question as well that I want to take a look back at. So I think next time we'll develop more. I'll take a look at some of these questions we've had, and I'll think about also what I said that I think about as I talked as well. Think about the mindscape, right? Some more and that sort of thing. But this is excellent. So, and we'll just develop all this a little bit more, and probably won't move on to much of a different topic quite yet, because if we just get this goalscape thing, it's just nuts. And plus, it relates to a number of other ideas and the bigger ideas and other ideas. And remember, we're always building in context to what's going to help you do even better with your career, with consulting, JVing, and or just you can be your own one-man gang, just totally working with yourself as well. Same thing, because when you're dealing with your brain, dealing with other people's brains and minds and so forth, it's all the similar model. You're welcome, Siaka. Thank you so much. I'm glad that I've helped facilitate. Just scrolling around a little bit here. David, hugs for your efforts and the 4-year-old rapscallion. You're welcome. David, can we have a visual of the alchemy process we can adjust? Yes, that would be great. I might look to do that like sometime in a month or two. There's a way that I'm building out my understanding of how it's going to, like, again, I know overall what I want to communicate, but there's a way that I need to kind of develop these out a little bit and take some webinars, and then it helps it take shape for myself as well in terms of bridging it for you guys. Or maybe I'll just come up with a mind map this week. We'll see. Or maybe it'll lead me to explain something about how I don't, maybe, again, I remember I deal with things a little bit in reverse of what people think is correct. I don't really start with mind maps. I start more with footholds and a framework and kind of foundational ideas. And so there's going to be assumptions we have about the way that things will work. There's going to be ways that sometimes I'll be doing something wrong. Like obviously I don't want to forget what I was talking about at the beginning of this webinar, right? And then that was just suboptimal to do that. But then there's other times that I'll be building out footholds and framework and context and there's a way that that's just eternally counterintuitive until it stops being counterintuitive. But it just really is counterintuitive. It's not something I could just say is counterintuitive and then it won't feel counterintuitive anymore. Thank you. That's so very nice to say. You are very welcome, and I appreciate you guys. I think what I did was I ate pretty well today, but I had several potato chips, which the only problem with that is it ends up messing with my ability to think quite as clearly as I would like. And I usually stay away from bread and carbohydrates altogether for the whole day that I do a webinar, and this time I didn't quite do that. And I'm totally happy with the webinar, and the ideas that I talked about are dead on, but then it could just mess with my train of thought just a little bit and things like that. So there's my lesson. I even mentioned that a week or two ago of how I normally don't do that. And so I violated my rule a little bit, and now I increased my understanding this way of how to do it. Enjoy your late supper. Keeps breaking my mind. It isn't easy, but I know my mind has come a long way. Excellent. Excellent. They do that, right? We have to have a whole plan. Although he's getting better. The funny story, though, at least funny, you might presumably, I don't know if I can quote it exactly, but the other day I had a webinar. I was doing a webinar, and he's gotten good. Chance has gotten good at not like knocking loudly on my door during webinar. But he says, he comes in from outside, like on the deck, and he says, "Mommy, I am a race car." He says, "That means I'm very fast, and you can't catch me." He says that first, and then he runs to my door to the basement where I work, and he knocks on it. So I don't know, it's just really funny the way he thinks. He always thinks in terms of construction vehicles, or in this case, race car vehicle. So it's pretty funny. Alrighty. Okay, we will end this one here after a mere 2 hours and 20 minutes, and then we'll continue next time. It looks like we have a nice agenda lining up for next time. We might have a particularly organized and clear and mind-mapped one next time, but we shall see. But one way or the other, we'll get there. We'll get there by October. Is all, or at least we'll get where we get by October. Is my overall plan. But we'll be here. You're very welcome. Take care, guys. Have a wonderful evening. Kombucha tea, good. Okay. I will take that to heart. That sound. I think I've heard that as well. Yeah, I'll look at that because it definitely makes a difference. Nutrition. There's on webinars basically. There's a certain clarity. Like there's my overall understanding of the concepts, which is one thing, which won't really fluctuate, except for when I just develop things and discover things. But then there's just like a clarity of mind, which is pretty much just flat out biological, right? In just terms of memory and coherence of thought and getting kind of that sort of thing. Food is a drug. Yeah, Mike likes to say that. Excellent, guys. I appreciate it so much. The attitude, the response, just the way you guys are participating in Alchemy, it just blows me away. I'm honored. Umbashi as well. My goodness. All right, I'll have a whole alphabet soup of things. Take some ginkgo. Perhaps is ginkgo still in vogue, or is that not? Thank you, Joanne, to that. You are quite welcome, Brian. Thank you, Michael. All right, I will see you guys next week. Yeah, I mean, you can figure all these things out. There's details, like for example, with me with like health and fitness, it's not something I prioritize yet, and it's kind of on my agenda. And the way I do things is I kind of open up a space to kind of focus on a particular thing or area of life, and that'll be one thing. I totally respect it. It's of course not going to like overall win, right? Like fitness or even biologically being able to not die that some people work on, that sort of thing. That's not going to dissolve all the bad ideas, right? So we start where we have to start. But then any particular thing that you choose to really excel and become world class in, including health, fitness, that sort of thing, certainly this foundation will only be helpful. And then it's just kind of details. But there's a way that you're going to be able to deal with your mind, whatever the topic is, in a terrific way. This is going to help you with all that. Not that you ever want to stop being addicted to cupcakes. Maybe you can be very healthy despite having cupcakes. Yeah. Yeah, people have their own styles, but I actually love that the hashtagging style. It also helps. It also helps get threads up and stimulate action. So we just have different skill sets and different styles. But yeah, with my style, I'm not doing the feedback thing in a certain way. But I'm very glad that it's done on other webinars. They absolutely would. They could be garbage trucks together. Everything with chances. I am a crave. And then, you know, or actually, I think my, oh no, is it, oh, it's not there anymore. One of my photos, I think, has Chance using a crane, an actual play crane, to lift his pancakes up and eat them. Pretty hilarious. That I did stabilize my weight. I gained a few pounds when I got married. I was already on the way to gaining a little bit, and then I gained some, but then I stopped it and haven't gone past. LOI is part of my like breathing for me, like love implication, everything I'm talking about. So it's part of everything, any goals that I'm going for. But I just kind of stipulated it that I wasn't going to go past a certain weight, and what that does is that puts the burden of proof on needing to have a foundational reason to go past it, and so that's kind of simplistically what I did that way. And you might say, well, why wouldn't you just stipulate lower? And I will likely go for doing that at some point. Not quite sure when. But it'll certainly take creative focus for me to lose weight, to figure out, sorry, it at least would take creative focus for me to figure out how to not struggle to lose weight, if that makes, to like dissolve any kind of struggle, and for myself. And it's probably, there might be some, there's universals absolutely with that, and then there's also kind of specifics for what works for a particular person. It's tough when you're happily married, right, to lose weight. Most everyone that says it's easy to lose weight, I find, is either single or kind of partially single or something like that, or they're I don't know. I don't want to say anything more, but that's the first hack, is just be single and really motivated to meet somebody, and then it all of a sudden becomes effortless and simple to lose weight. I really enjoy the give and take and the open interaction that exudes from your webinars. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I like this part too. Both parts I think are kind of necessary, but certainly the victory lap at the end is great, and just discussing and everything is good. There you go. Yeah. I mean, in certain women or certain cultures, you know, they at least part of the idea. I'm sure that they like guys to be thin, but they also like to chubby them up a little bit, kind of intuitively, right? And then it kind of makes the guy a little bit more safe, more their own, a little less potential competition and so forth. All right, okay, guys, I really will end it now. I appreciate you guys so much, and I will see you all next week. It's funny.